Welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast, and I'm really delighted to have with me today Chris Stindt. Is that right? Have I got that right, Chris?
Yes, thank you.
It's so lovely to see you. And Chris is the marketing director for Jägermeister, which many of our listeners, of course, I'm sure will have drunk at many times over the years. And as we approach the Christmas season, it's going to be certainly a great time for your sales. It's probably your busiest time of year, isn't it? Christmas, Chris?
It certainly is. We do about 40% of our volume in the last quarter, and right now we actually have all of our on-trade team out in the field helping stacking shelves in the big retailers across the UK.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. That's cool. So anyway, before we get deep into, influencers and what and how you use them as part of your strategy, for those of us that don't know about your background, tell us a little bit about you personally and about what your role is at Jägermeister.
So yeah, my name is Chris Stindt. I'm from Germany originally, so I appreciate not discussing the World Cup in this podcast. No, joking aside, I moved to the UK about 2 years ago. I'm the marketing director for the UK, for Jägermeister in the UK. I've been with Jägermeister over 10 years in various roles, mostly managing different markets across the Western Europe regions, from the smaller ones such as Malta and Luxembourg and Cyprus to the bigger ones such as Italy and Spain or the Netherlands. And so 2 years ago, we packed up and moved here. And our mission is when people have the best nights of their lives, we want to be there. So that is quite a sexy mission that we're on. And Jägermeister is very much a spirit that happens in the nightlife when people are having a good time. But it's not just the functional benefit of the product, but it's really the brand that we want people to buy into. So that's what it's all about. It's a very rewarding mission, and it's a fun job with a great team behind me.
Yeah, no, amazing. And what's the typical target consumer for you?
We focus right now on 18 to 24-year-old consumers, so people that reach their legal drinking age. And why do we do that? Well, because we know those are the ones most likely to go out into the on-trade. So the on-trade being bars, pubs, clubs, and having a good time, celebrating, having parties, etc. So that's when we want to recruit them, but ultimately then we aim to retain them
Throughout their life,
their life, hopefully. But we do know that naturally, once you hit a certain age, you tend to go out a little bit less. At which point, of course, we want to remind them that we can also drink Jägermeister at home, but we do know that primarily our product is consumed in the on-trade. We reckon it's about 75 to 80% being drunk in bars, pubs, and clubs.
Yeah. Now, we, of course, met at an education event, didn't we? And we're on the same panel, and it was really quite fascinating to talk about sort of ambassador programs and how students can be a big part of growing a brand's influence, not just the universities, of course, but also brands like your own. Now, you have worked with influencers, haven't you, to promote Jägermeister? And are these student ambassadors, or tell us a little bit about how you've engaged with them and what you've done?
So we have students up and down the country. There's almost 40 of them in over a dozen different cities across the UK. And they do a variety of things for us. I mean, mostly those are the quote unquote cool kids on campus. So they know where all the good events are. They probably know all the local clubs and cool bars and so, and have a good network there. But they're also very active on social media. So they're quite influential in their scenes. So whereas they probably wouldn't build themselves an influencer with millions and millions of followers online, they do have a strong following on a local level, and some of them actually are quite a big one beyond that. So it really comes down to identifying them, because they really influence the local circuit of students. So if you go to, say, a city like Newcastle or Sheffield or so, you basically want to identify those guys who love your brand, and make sure that they convey the right message about it. So in our case, we want to make sure that they convey the image that we want people to think about our brand, and ultimately be aware that Jägermeister is best consumed ice cold as a shot, So it's both quite a functional thing as well as an emotional, image-driven thing.
Yeah. And how do you find these individuals? How do you recruit them?
We work together with an agency called Raptor, who basically bill themselves, I think they call themselves the student marketing agency or something along those lines. They're a great bunch of guys, founded by former students, and they sit right at the heart of the 18 to 24-year-old Gen Z audience, and they really help us identifying potential talent, and then we together select the right ones, and then also agree on certain targets, certain KPIs that they have to hit, which ranges from sampling product, being present at events, to also being present on social media.
Yeah. And do you boost any of their content from these students by putting some paid spend behind it to get more eyeballs on it, or is it just very much organic driven?
That is very much organically driven. So every now and then, if a post really is phenomenal, let's say, we might pick it up for our own brand channels, but then it has to go through a variety of different checks, because there's still a bit of a difference if you send it on the brand channel. The other thing is, though, it's some of this is happening in sort of behind closed doors in their local WhatsApp groups, for instance, or some private messages or so. And I mean, there's nothing secretive about it. It's just that those are the things where we want to get this word of mouth going. And I think once you boost it, then it almost gets to a point where it feels a bit more commercial, and that's kind of what we don't want to have on this one.
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah. That, because there's a lot to be said for what I call almost like not the dark side, but the hidden channels of these WhatsApp groups can be hugely powerful, can't they, in their own right? And you can't always see the analytics of those.
I guess that is the pitfall of this. We don't know exactly what happens. It's like a black box. So it's exactly. Believing it, but I guess if we get to a point where we don't believe our student brand ambassadors, in the case, we don't believe what they tell us, then we probably have a bigger issue. And so far, that hasn't been the case. I think we have a great team of people who really get the brand and help us actually a lot of getting the target audience. Now, when it comes to bigger campaigns or other campaigns where we involve other sorts of influencers, then yes, we would definitely boost their posts.
And do you have different campaigns at all that you run with them specifically? Because this, we often talk about always on in the influencer space. It's sometimes difficult because people that are highly influential have other people reaching out to them all of the time, and so let's just say, for example, an ambassador that works for you could be approached by one of your competitor brands or another drink brand. How does that work out? Is there an exclusive arrangement, or is there anything that allows them to take up those collaborations?
Well, that's a very good question, Gordon, because obviously what we want is for them to only think of Jägermeister and only advertise us, but we also know that that's not entirely realistic all the time. So usually we try to identify people that actually love the brand organically and genuinely. So that's definitely one of the first things we ask, which usually helps with this very discussion down the line. But what we do realistically is, like, as long as they're attached to our brand in whatever parameter is, it might be a few months or maybe a little bit more than that, there is a exclusivity clause in the contract that we draw up with them. And it depends on both parties to define the parameters. Is it, for instance, just spirits? Is it shots? Is it alcohol brands in total? So that sort of depends. But for instance, when we had a campaign that we recently developed, it's called The Secret is Ice Cold. And I can tell a little bit about the background in a second there. But ultimately, originally, it was developed before the pandemic together with a set of influencers. It's basically some influencers holding a shot glass or going, putting their finger across the mouth and doing the shh symbol, if you will, right? To let them in that the secret is ice cold, because that is the secret to drinking Jägermeister in its perfect way. It's when all the different taste profiles reach perfect harmony between the bitterness, the sweetness, the herbaceous nature. So we used influence for that. And then obviously everything went a bit upside down in 2020. And then last year we said, okay, let's now really launch this campaign. Let's create another more moving image driven campaign around this. We went back to the same people. And even now when we have events, we invite the same people to our events. So they post about it organically. And some of them aren't even on a retained budget with us right now, but they still are engaged either on an ad hoc basis. And sometimes we just invite them because they sort of become friends of the brand, which is great because then again, it becomes much more organically driven when they spread the content there. We also work a lot with people in the music industry, for instance, with DJs, with producers. And when actually for the same campaign, we said, okay, we obviously need to track to accompany that. We've done a lot of work with Majestic, who's a big DJ, had a smash it if you was it last year or the year before, and certainly before then. And we asked him, okay, would you be willing to help us with this? So he is a friend of the brand, and he said, absolutely, I'd love that. So we said, okay, we'll spin a story around that. So yes, he supplies the track, but there's also a story about why he does it, and how he plays with Ice Cold, for instance. Some Ice Cold sounds in that track. Amazing. Which in turn turns him into an influencer. So that is something that allows us to grow the story organically, and thereby not just have this on-off thing where they might go for Jägermeister today and maybe for another brand next week, but we have something that just continues through.
Yeah, perfect. So I was just saying, and then you're ticking that always on box, and people that would have gone and bought the product for themselves, regardless of whether or not they had a brand collaboration with them. So I think it's a very strong message for brands to be able to reach out to influencers and know that they're not just going for something because of the goodies or the money. They're going for it because they believe in the values of what that brand is all about. And more importantly, they have an understanding of that their followers would like that as well, because at the end of the day, it's not just about the influence. Of course, it's their follower base, isn't it? And you want people that have got a similar interest in
absolutely
drink and nights out and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for us the key message is that we understand that people get paid for this, and that's part of the bargain. And I think that's it's a respectable profession now. So we have a commercial interest, so it's only fair that people do get paid for that if they endorse our brand. But at the same time, we think it's important that the first question you should ask is probably right after you look at their followers is do they like the brand? We were evaluating working with a big US rapper a few months ago, and it turns out he doesn't drink alcohol. So he would have actually been open to working with us, but we said in that case, that's not the right message. It's not genuine. So I think whatever we do, we have to be genuine what you do. So we said, okay, that's probably something that we wouldn't want to do.
Yeah. You talked earlier, Chris, about KPIs. Tell us a little bit about what they look like and how, if you're able to, some of the successes of some of the individual influencers, because if you've got a whole bunch of them together, they're not all necessarily going to be performing at the same level. It's like having a horse race, isn't it? And not knowing which one is going to outperform. It could be something that they did, or the time that they posted. It could be all number of different metrics. How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because again, I suppose it's one of the pitfalls of everything being digital now, and you have access of a lot of data. So what's the right data to look at? And is there too much data, which probably sometimes is the case. You're looking at massive spreadsheets and wondering, okay, which number is the one that helps me now, whether we've had success or not. Probably one of the big ones that we look at initially is, okay, how many people have seen this? If we say we want to recruit people into our brand, it's about reaching them with a message that makes sense, that ultimately is relevant to them. So for instance, we know how many people live in the UK, we know how many people of them are between 18 and 24, and how many of them drink alcohol and how many drink us. So we can sort of identify, okay, what is the potential here? So I guess it's the basics of advertising, getting them to see your product, to see your message, and repeating this message until finally it lands, and making sure the message actually resonates in a positive way. And influencers is a very important part of that media mix, if you want to call it that. So therefore, I suppose one of the main KPIs is making sure that the message does get out. How many people have seen it? You know, what's the reach? And then what are the actual? What's the view rate? You know, if it's a video, you can track obviously how many people have seen it. So those kind of things are out there. When we talk about things like these student brand ambassadors, I said there's almost 40 of them. So then it becomes a bit more qualitatively driven almost. Then you actually task them with coming up with something creatively engaging, and that's something where we just look at it and we can see, okay, this works, this doesn't work. Now you can also see then how it resonates with their followers if they post it, for instance, on Instagram rather than a WhatsApp channel. But because sometimes their follower base might be a little bit smaller, it's tricky that you don't just you know, are put off by the small numbers. You just look at what it does within their circuit.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about engagement rate is stronger than follower base sometimes, isn't it? I mean, I've definitely seen people that have got, you know, 5,000 followers or less even, but have a huge level of engagement and relevance to the particular sector. You can have somebody that's got 100,000 followers, but, you know, if they're not interested in the particular genre or interest, then it's wasted media. Or more importantly, bearing in mind we're talking about the UK, if 3/4 of that audience is based in America or in the Philippines or South America, that's wasted. So it's so important to look behind the data of the followers, isn't it? More than ever.
Yes, absolutely. And then also, you know, it's about what exactly they post about. So engagement is one, but also if we're talking about raising brand awareness, you know, getting brand exposure, then you literally have to go into the post and see, okay, has the brand been mentioned? We had an event a few weeks ago in Manchester where we had launched a collaboration with a streetwear outfit called 474, two brilliant guys from Manchester who basically launched an organic fashion label, and we launched a capsule collection with them. So we had a big event there at Warehouse Projects and invited a lot of influencers there. And within, I think, one night, we almost had like 3 million views or so with wow. You know, with a few of those. So but then you actually go into the post and say, okay, did they just say, hey, you know, I went to an event? Or did they say, okay, I went to an event with Jägermeister and they show the product? And I have to say, in a lot of cases, that was the case, which was quite nice. So you have to make sure, even if you stage an event, that you think of those things, that you give them good Instagrammable backgrounds, that there's now visual cues that actually make it interesting for their followers to look at.
That's a great point. Yeah, visual cues, you know, and more I've seen it with restaurants and bars now, putting like flowers and things outside. Almost you can see that's, we now almost use it. That's a great Instagrammable venue. And when I've been out and about with influencers, I can see that some brands have really thought about this, because at the end of the day, they need content. They need content to inspire their audience all of the time. And that's a really good point that you've raised there. Plus, also, I think the importance of a dedicated event hashtag that is used. And how do you like have briefings with these ambassadors? Is there a manager within Jägermeister that looks after them all and is constantly communicating with them to make sure that they're you know, on brand or well supported?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's with anything, you need to be quite clear about what you want, because that makes it easier for everyone. I think sometimes you find situations where you think, okay, it's a little bit delicate. Am I asking for too much here? I don't want to rock the boat. But I think actually that can backfire, because ultimately you won't be happy with the result. So I think the clearer you are about your expectations, the better it is. Also for the influencers, because they know what you want from them. And if you're quite clear, I mean, you have to be honest, but you know, you can be polite about it, but just say, okay, this is an agreement, as these are my expectations, but what I want, let's agree beforehand what's possible and what's not. So that, I think, is essential to making sure you have that output there. So you're giving them an opportunity. You usually also are giving them some money, so you can also be quite clear about, you know, what you expect at the other end of the bargain there. And like I think ultimately leads to successful outcome for both sides.
Yeah, great. I mean, so finally, Chris, what's the sort of future look like for Jägermeister? What are some of the things that you're looking at or exploring at the moment that may have an influence or impact?
Well, I believe that we will probably continue our trajectory of having this, classic BTL, below the line experiential um, arena that we continue to play at. Festivals are a big thing. We were present at 5 major festivals in the summer this year. Obviously, the festival landscape has changed somewhat after the pandemic, but we're going to double down on that next year with more festivals that we will visit. And they are usually, to your point, very much Instagrammable. They usually give great backgrounds. We will also continue working with up and coming artists from the music scene, but also from fashion, etc. So to foster these collaborations and have events around those things. So that's definitely something where we make sure that influencers are part of the mix. I think on the whole, whenever we have a brand activation, there's always going to be a digital angle to it, and that naturally means that there will be an opportunity for influencers to become interesting and relevant for us. So it's almost like a natural given that they will be part of the mix.
Great. I mean, I was just going to ask you just before we finish, have you got much in the way of Jaeger merch and style clothing? Because I noticed that more and more brands are realizing that having an extension of the brand by having fashionable, stylish clothing is a great way of getting people more connected with it. And of course, it's also a visual advert for everybody going out and about there.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have, I suppose, various forms of it. So at the top end probably would be collaborations with proper fashion designers, such as this 474 a company that we work with in Manchester. At the bottom end, just t-shirts or lanyards, or what was really successful last year were some bucket hats that we designed and gave out at festivals, and some bandanas, and those things traveled. Like, we saw them at festivals that we didn't even activate, but afterwards we saw some pictures and some videos. I'm like, hang on a minute, man. We weren't there. Where did they get this from? So obviously they picked them up from the festivals where we were, where we sent some pictures from our bucket hat traveling to places like Ibiza. So that's something where, to your point, consumers actually brand the venues they get to with our merch. But I suppose we also have to find the right balance between having a branded message on the item, but still having it look cool enough that people actually will wear it. So
100%. No, and I used to be heavily involved in the merchandise industry for running the UK association for it, so I know quite a lot about it.
Good,
but in a way, you're absolutely right. I remember when Carling Black Label had a range of clothing.
Yeah.
And they decided not to have the Carling logo splattered all around it because people wouldn't want to be wearing something that looks so advertising. But they had I'm up for it, are you, as their logo, and that was effectively what they were, and that was a great message, like, I'm up for it, are you, and the branding was actually on the inside back neck collar. It was such a cool piece of clothing. So you're absolutely right. You want to have something that people feel aligned to, that doesn't look like it's blatant advertising, and getting that absolutely right could be stratospheric in terms of impressions and impacts, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's what you want. Like, if you want to get a piece out there, I suppose the easiest thing to make sure that your brand is visible on a piece of clothing, you buy a football club, and then you can make sure it gets seen by millions. Exactly. Very costly though. But it's certainly been done before. If you want people to talk about your brand rather than just seeing the brand, then it's those kind of things. And I mean, I don't know, the Carling example, what a cool story, and how much further is that going to travel? If somebody says, hey, I bought this great piece from Carling. Oh wow, that looks so cool. I mean, that's such a cool story. And if there actually, maybe there's another story behind this, that's how people then engage with your brand on a whole different label. If they have discovered it, I think that's another big thing, that people now want to discover things for themselves. So if you give them a story to discover, that will give them even more things to talk about, both in face-to-face conversations, but also on their socials.
Yeah, well, I have to say, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your insights, and I'm so pleased the brand is doing well under your stewardship in the marketing team. Thanks again for joining us on the Influence Global podcast.
Thank you, Gordon. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
That's it for another edition of Influence. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and give me your feedback, gordon@gordonglenister.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, where you can also ask me a question. If you're able to give us a 5-star review, we really do appreciate it. And also, if you want help in creating an influencer marketing strategy, or you want to join the Influencer Marketing Roundtable event, which we host every Wednesday morning on Zoom, then head over to gordonglenister.com where you can find out more about the details. And if you want to find out more about our shows and many others, go over to the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network, and you can find them all there. Thanks as always to my producer Neil Whiteside from Freedom One. And until next time, from me, Gordon Glenister, it's bye for now.